Okay, you still got that. Oh, it's you still got that covered up there.
Right.
Okay.
Just let me know when you want to show something, and I'll take it off.
Oh, okay. So the camera is working now. Okay. All right. All right. Well, to start off with, I've handed out the latest leaflet from Mr. LaRouche, which is now circulating nationally and internationally. It has been over the last few days. It was released August 26th. Just a one-sided statement, which at the bottom you see it says, "Has your congressman co-sponsored Glass-Steagall?" and references Senate Bill 1709 and HR, that's House of Representatives 381, followed with a phone number. And this is the urgent business of the moment for citizens throughout the United States in particular. But as he states in the leaflet, it's now needed worldwide. The title is LaRouche, Wall Street is hopelessly bankrupt. Institute Glass-Steagall worldwide immediately. Which means sovereign nations have to collaborate to basically carry it out, you know, each on their own terms, in their own lands, in their own nations. So that we have an orderly process now of reorganization of what is a 2 quadrillion, that's 2,000 trillion dollar bubble, you know, the derivatives financial bubble, that's coming down now, the derivatives bubble. And that's what's in process. We've had some upticks. There's been numerous articles written about the intervention by the Plunge Protection Committee, which is an actual committee of the Fed and the U.S. Treasury that's intervening to purchase stocks themselves. They do it through brokers, through you know, close relationships that are established to carry out those purchases. And they engage in coordinating activity with the other major banks and other institutions, hedge funds, and so forth. And you saw that in the course of this last week with these upticks in the market and attempts to try to stabilize what's happening. But I think the essential point here is to think of it, if you know the term a Ponzi scheme, what we're dealing with in terms of the $2 trillion financial derivatives bubble is a Ponzi scheme of the largest sort. And as with any Ponzi scheme, once confidence is lost in the Ponzi scheme, it's lost because there isn't any there to begin with. You know, there's been a certain amount of money being paid out of the Ponzi scheme to attract more money in, but at a certain point, it comes down on it. You know, it comes down on its own, and that's what's in process, and the confidence has been lost. And Greece was, in many ways, the dying canary in the mine shaft of that process that's unfolding now globally. It's not about China. It's about the transatlantic financial system, and this is we're reaping the rewards of the bailout in 2008, 2009. So the legislation, Senate Bill 1709, HR 381, they're in the Congress now. HR 381, as of early July, had 65 sponsors on it. The Senate bill has 5 sponsors, which includes John McCain, former presidential candidate. It includes Bernie Sanders, who's a current presidential candidate, and the others are noted on the material, the handout I handed out. Otherwise, some background material on Glass-Steagall. Saying that, I want to move immediately to what is another feature of the situation. Well, one more moment on this on Glass-Steagall. Mark, you brought up the Republican Party. Why not more sponsors of Glass-Steagall at this moment from the Republican side of the aisle in Congress? Well, very interesting. The Washington Post, their columnist Harold Meyerson this last week, and also Robert Patterson, writing in the Philadelphia Inquirer and also in the Washington Times, which is a Republican Party-oriented newspaper, both called for Glass-Steagall to become a major topic of debate in the upcoming Republican presidential debates. This is what Meyerson had, just to give you a flavor. The questions candidates should be asked in the next GOP debate. Chief among these was the economy, the perennial #1 concern of Americans generally, and of rank-and-file Republicans too. Would you favor breaking up the banks that are designated as too big to fail? Would you favor passing a new version of the Glass-Steagall Act that separates federally insured depositor banks from trading and investment banks? So this is exemplary of a debate that's now going on in the Republican Party. Michael Huckabee, this last week, it was reported in the Des Moines Register in Iowa, speaking there, called for the repeal of Dodd-Frank, the existing Citibank-written legislation that's doing nothing, and it said that the repeal of Glass-Steagall was a mistake. And Rick Perry, our former governor, who's also in the race there somewhere, it's been about a month ago in New York, called for bank separation. And this was reported in the press as a support for Glass-Steagall on his part. So there is a debate going on, and I think that really reflects the what's going on in what would be the operating institution of the presidency, which shall we say is bipartisan or nonpartisan. That there's a broader debate, and it's got to be brought to the fore. And so we're not operating in a vacuum. We're operating in a situation where we can move things. Congress is supposed to be back on September 8th. Mr. LaRouche is saying they've got to get back now. And that's what the pressure should be on, is to get them back now. As soon as they get back there, this has got to be at the top of the agenda. Now, just moving on, then I just want to bring to the fore the other feature of, shall we say, the big picture, which I'm sure you're already somewhat aware of, which is the war danger. I'm talking about general war, thermonuclear war, the potential war between the United States and Russia in particular. And it's tied to this financial collapse. Let me just quote briefly from, this is from Italy, and I'll give a few more instances of this sort of thing. Professor Nino Golini, writing in Il Domini d'Italia, the Tomorrow of Italy. And he's an economist, leading Italian economist and strategic thinker. And he writes, the financial crisis makes the conflict among superpowers more likely. China, Russia, and India want to avoid it, whereas American, British, and transnational lobbies involving weapons lobbies, parallel intelligence agencies, pro-Israeli organizations, etc., consider war to be the only option at the point. Thus, it will be fundamental whether the United States will regain control of policy. Right? The idea that the United States has to regain sovereign control of its own policy making. And he goes on to stress, we need international agreements. And he cites the interview with former Secretary of State Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, that's in the current issue of National Interest, in which Kissinger warns of the war danger and the need for serious negotiations with the Russians. So that's Golini, but he's making the connection between the economic crisis and the increasing danger of war, that the impulse for war is coming from the global financial breakdown, and the fact that certain interest powers, he says pro-Israeli at one point, I mean, that's really spacious, but the broader point is that the financial oligarchy on both sides of the Atlantic are losing power, and losing power through the monetary system by which they've run the show. So they have to go to power by other means, or to maintain power. And so if you're desperate, you're willing to kick over the chessboard, and try to let the pieces fall where they may. And you're willing to play out a game of nuclear chicken with Russia. I mentioned it just earlier in our casual conversation, but I remind people of the remarks of General Cartwright in the New York Times. It was April 19th. General James Cartwright and General Vladimir Vorkin, who also is a prominent figure on the Russian side, co-authored an op-ed, which you can find online, titled "How to Avert a Nuclear War." This is in April of this year, and it's not an abstract piece. It's warning of this risky strategic environment between Russia and the West, including the nuclear dimension, that's a quote, that now exists, and that both countries operate on the basis of launch on warning. And just to underscore again, James Cartwright, General James Cartwright, retired, was the former head of the Strategic Air Command, or the U.S. Strategic Command, that is command of the entire triad. And Vorkin was the head of intelligence for the Russian Strategic Missile Force. So they're both speaking as prominent individuals, right? But they're speaking past the president, right? Past the Congress to the American people. And I think this is just a very important example, along with the remarks of Kissinger, who we've had our major differences with over the decades, and at times very personal differences. But at this point, Kissinger is joining LaRouche in warning of the danger of thermonuclear war. So the final just point or example I want to give on this, just to underscore that there's a lot of voices on this, which is important. There weren't before. Cartwright was really singular at the point that he spoke out. But something called the European Leadership Group, which is composed primarily of foreign ministers, former foreign ministers, and former defense ministers from throughout Europe and Russia, have issued their third report in the matter of a few months on the threat of war. This one is titled, quote, "Avoiding War in Europe, How to Reduce the Risk of a Military Encounter Between Russia and NATO." And again, they're speaking specifically, and I haven't mentioned this yet, they're speaking specifically to the density of military exercises now going on along the border areas between Russia and the Eastern European nations that are being increasingly integrated into NATO directly, with U.S. and NATO forces being moved up, equipment being moved up into Poland, Romania, into the Baltic countries, and so on and so forth. And so they're warning of the necessity to open up channels of communication. There are no, with the exception that I know of Kerry's channel with Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, there are no broader network of channels between Russia and the United States. They've all been closed down. And the military channels between the two are also being increasingly closed down by President Obama directly through the reshuffling that's going on now of positions. You have a turnover of the Joint Chiefs of Staff going on now. Other positions are being changed. And so people who did maintain friendships, networks, shall we say, who networked, across the line, are gone or are leaving, or have been shifted to other positions where they no longer have those responsibilities. Right? They have other responsibilities. So they're stressing the need to reconvene the NATO-Russia Council, which was closed down around the Crimea business, and similar moves. And this task force paper is signed by Malcolm Rifkin, former Foreign and Defense Secretary of the United Kingdom, Desmond Brown, former UK Defense Minister, Trubnikov, the former director of the Russian Foreign Intelligence, Igor Ivanov, Russian Foreign Minister, Adam Daniel Rotfield, former Polish Foreign Minister, the former Defense Minister of France, the former German Defense Minister, Volker Ruhl, and Anna Palacio, former Foreign Minister of Spain. Anyway, there's other names, but just to give you a sense, they are speaking out over the dramatic developments, dangerous developments that are going on at this moment. The largest airborne exercises since the end of the Cold War are going on right now, are concluding roughly in this time frame right now, in Bulgaria, with a parachute drop of American airborne troops into Bulgaria. I mean, just to underscore, you know, how real this is. So, and those exercises are continuing into September and October, different rolling sets of such exercises, all on board and on the Russian side as well. So at any point, those exercises could become live, and it really should sharpen our wits and help. And of course, the American people need help waking up. They've been sleepwalking while this has been going on, and they need to wake up. And a final point on this, Lyndon is saying the presidential candidates, who will be the first, right, Republican or Democrat, who will be the first to come out and raise the issue, the danger of thermonuclear war under this president, under President Obama? Who will raise the issue to force a debate on Article 25, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution for Obama's immediate removal, to remove his finger from the button? And any presidential candidate could do that. You know, John McCain could do it. Bernie Sanders could do it. You can imagine how they might do it in different flavors or whatever. But the point is, raise it. Why is nobody raising this strategic danger that's before us now? So I'm going to just move on and make a transition here, which is to come back to something I was mentioning earlier before we started this online broadcast, which is the specific role of the institution of the presidency, which Mr. LaRouche singles out in the leaflet. He specifies, if I can put my finger on it right away here. Can I borrow you? Okay. Not that one, the leaflet. Here we go. Okay. This is August 26, 2015. He says in the third paragraph on the necessity of Glass-Steagall immediately, he says, we must preemptively close down Wall Street and force the issue back to the presidential system. That means immediately reconvening the U.S. Congress and so on and so forth. Forcing the issue back on the presidential system. The United States does not have an intention. We are not going anywhere. Quite aside from the fact that the financial system is crashing now and the physical economy of the United States has been running downhill for decades, and the fact that we're facing thermonuclear war in this game of chicken, the point is, more broadly, we don't have an intention as a nation, and a lot of our fellow Americans have given up as a result, really, in some ways as a result. But we have to give the nation back its intention, and that operates through the presidency, the institution of the presidency. Right now, we have Team Obama, which has closed off communications with the broader process of advice and consent of specialists in fields from foreign affairs to national security to science and so on and so forth. These have been closed off. This is an isolated group of people running the country now. Right, running it on a neocon vision, really an apocalyptic vision. So the question of science and a science driver for the country is an extremely important part of what we've got to be discussing. As important, for example, as the question of culture. We have to give this country back an actual culture in terms of music, in terms of poetry, in terms of literature. You know, not what we have coming out of, you know, Hollywood and the like, but an actual culture that develops the gifts, the creative capacities of our citizens. Those creative capacities have to be utilized, and a science driver, along with a technological driver and so on, drivers plural, you know, is what has to be reestablished. Think of John F. Kennedy, right? we're going to the new the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, right? Right? Why does Rice play UT? Right? He said that, if you don't recall that. That was his follow-on to that statement. Because it's hard. It's a challenge. And that's why we took on the task of going to the moon. Not merely the Sputnik, but because we had to break out of a trap that we were already falling into at that point. And so we had that program, the Apollo program, and so on and so forth. So today, as part, along with bringing into a being and a functioning presidency, as part of that process, and Glass-Steagall is part of that. Getting that implemented is going to be part of that. Obama's going to have to be moved out of the White House for Glass-Steagall to be implemented. Is a science policy. And what LaRouche has specified in particular is that we're going to go galactic. We have to go to the galactic level in terms of the new, shall we say, where the new breakthroughs are going to come. And he doesn't mean that we're going to go all get in spaceships and we're going to all go flying, into the galaxy. He's talking about that conceptually we have to face a new level of scientific problems and paradoxes, which in solving them are going to give us new tools here on Earth. Now this began, in terms of this effort, the work that we've been doing, our science team has been doing, which you'll find on the LaRouche PAC website. You'll find the basement. At the top there's tabs, and if you look under our activities, you'll find a tab that says basement, the basement. And that's our science team. That's the nickname for our science team. And what I'm going to be presenting now on this is primarily drawn from their team report, Towards a Galactic Science Driver, which was published earlier this year in July. So let's have the first slide, if we call it that, or
Milky Way images.
Yeah. The atmospheric. It starts with the two at the bottom, the way it ended up.
John. Which one you said?
Down here, start with this atmospheric river.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you know that we've got a major drought going on in the west and southwest. And stretching into Texas, although it's moderated some here, but certainly in West Texas it's still a problem, and from there on west it gets worse. Now we had proposed, starting actually back in the 80s, we had proposed the construction of NWAPA, the North American Water Alliance Project. Do you know about this, or are people familiar? Someone? Yes. Okay. To create man-made rivers, bringing water down from Alaska, tapping a small percentage, 10%, 15% of the water running into the Arctic, right, and bringing it down the Alaska Trench, down into Canada, and then down into the United States and down into the prairie states, and branching out from there. And we went through several revisions of that, working with collaborators in multitudes of fields, updating that in terms of a nuclear NWAPA, and then a fusion power-driven NWAPA as the next is going to the next level, starting with nuclear but moving to fusion as rapidly as possible. However, something interceded, which was the drought. And the best estimates, the best evidence, this drought is going to go on, and may go on for 300 years. It may go on longer. And without getting into details, we'll get to some of the factors of that in the next in what I present in the next half an hour or so. But it's not a shortage of water. The water is there. This first picture I have up here identifies what it states: an atmospheric river. Above us above the clouds, shall we say, continually running, are a set of Amazon rivers, and they're continually shifting. Could we go to the next one? That is, they're not static, but they're moving incredible amounts of water around the Earth, right? And there's a certain number of them in certain areas that are identifiable, right, as existing patterns and so on and so forth. In other words, the problem is not that there's not water to tap. We've got to bring it back down to Earth. Now, did we get this that second one up? The other atmospheric, the lowest one. It's not moving. All right. Well, it's a series of frames that show over a period of time a set of atmospheric rivers.
Okay.
Over the Pacific, as in the last one, but here it is. And you can see just the changes there in terms of the flows. They're coming from the Pacific, coming from Asia, across the Pacific, and then branching, right? And you see here coming into the west coast of the United States. Here you see it dropping further south, and so on and so forth. And now, what we identified, what LaRouche and Ben Deniston and others put their fingers on based on research that had recently been going on, was the fact that we had to tap new capabilities. We had to have new ideas. If we were going to get water where it was needed. California is not a small part of the U.S. economy. By itself, it's the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world. And if you think about it, here we are on the anniversary of Katrina, striking New Orleans. You know, the future we cannot allow the future to be that we have disasters and we walk away from them. We're a nation. We're a nation that has a principle of the general welfare and doing what we need to do for our posterity. So we have to meet these challenges as a nation. And the institution of the presidency is what's required to make that happen, to coordinate that, to deploy the forces necessary to make that happen. Now, so the two features that we identified, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them here, but we identified desalinization as a critical feature of what had to be brought online immediately. Nuclear power desalinization plants. You know, less than a dozen nuclear power plants up and down the West Coast could provide water for all the major cities in California. And then and that would thereby make water available, you know, the water otherwise available for other uses. I think the number for guesstimated for California would be 7 nuclear power plants to primarily drive desalinization facilities. The second feature that we identified was atmospheric ionization, which is on the frontiers of science. Could we go to the next one there at the top?
The ionization array.
To the first one.
Is that it?
No, the one above it. Yeah, the BBB. Yeah.
BBB.
Yep. You just go alphabetically. All right. Atmospheric ionization. It turns out, Hans Svensbark, other scientists working on this over the last couple of decades, that ionization of the atmosphere by galactic forces, by energized photons coming in, gamma rays, so coming in from the galaxy, not from the sun, but from the galaxy, and the modulations of that energy, those photons, those packets of energy, breaking up particles in the atmosphere and creating cascades effects on their way down, we're creating the ionized particles around which then water molecules could gel and could build to the point that they could form clouds and they could precipitate. And the fluctuations of this, based on the fluctuations in solar radiation hitting the Earth, modulated this process. In other words, you had increasing and decreasing amounts of cloud cover and then rain based on the amount of ionized particles, photons, energy, reaching us from the galaxy. So if you look at the first chart that you have a single page with some charts. The top chart, which is labeled Space Environment Overview, 1983 to 2013. On the top, you have the daily sunspot number. So we're talking about the sun. And sunspot activity has a 11-year cycle. It increases and decreases on an 11-year approximately cycle. Over time, it can go longer, it can go shorter. We'll leave that aside for the moment. Then you go to the bottom of it. The bottom of the three charts sandwiched there together. I'm still talking about the top chart, but the third of the three sets of squiggles there, identified there. And you see that it's labeled X-rays. These are the X-rays measured on Earth, underground actually. These are X-rays coming from the sun, okay? And you see that the X-rays coming from the sun are operating along with the sunspot activity. In other words, the sunspot activity on the sun itself, is then throwing off powerful electromagnetic pulses, plasmas, and so forth, who are reaching the Earth, and among other forms, in the form of X-rays. In the middle there, what you see is the cosmic ray measures measured in that same time period in terms of the measurement of these from satellites. And you see how they're operating in inverse proportion. In other words, the bombardment of the Earth, the ionization of particles going on Earth, is in inverse proportion to the increase of sunspot activity. Sunspot activity, the creation sets off activity on the Earth in terms of the atmospherics surrounding the Earth. It blocks the incoming ionized particles as a result. The magnetic shield around the United States stops those ionized particles from coming in. But when the sunspot activity dies off, then more ionization occurs in the atmosphere, more cloud cover therefore occurs. Right? That's the result of this process going on. Let me just stop there. I'm just trying to quickly summarize a bit of data here. Okay. So the galaxy have found out is already playing a major role in determining processes here on Earth in terms of climate change. Not man-made climate change, natural climate change. And this is something that the Greens and so forth do not want to even touch. Right? Because I mean, what is it? The galaxy? What is man's activity compared to the activity of the galaxy? So this completely throws out the window the set of arguments around man-made climate change. But more importantly for us, is this puts a finger on a process that work began being done about a decade and a half ago, is that if ionization is the means by which clouds are created and it's done in this fashion, if they can be created by the galaxy, incoming photons from the galaxy, well then man potentially could also create this ionization process, right? We could ionize the atmosphere. We can manipulate it and utilize this process to help bring atmospheric moisture, right, into areas. We could create the ionized particles around which molecules of water could form, clouds could form, and rain transpire. So did we get to the? Can we get another one up there, or are we?
What do you want to show?
The next one down. Well, the BBB, we didn't get that up before. We just started to get that up. BBB
Okay.
show.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we'll go quickly to the next one down. But this is just the action of energy. Breaking loose electrons, right, from stable molecules of nitrogen, oxygen, and so forth, right, creating ionized positive ions, negative ions, right, and then you're getting this because of the ionization process. Then you're attracting water molecules and some nitrogen and so forth, and you're getting the creation then over time of these of water molecules, right, of the size that can become rain. The next one.
Which is this one?
Mm-hmm. All right, now there's been a number of tests on this, and quickly moving through this. In Mexico, in Abu Dhabi, in Australia, and these are towers, 30-foot towers or higher, with voltage lines running around them, just wires, about 500 watts. You know what you can run a microwave on. And these wires, the tuning of these wires and the running of electric current through these wires is utilized to ionize the immediately surrounding atmosphere. And then these ions float up, creating, because it's electrons in these wires, you're creating primarily positive, you're breaking off electrons and you have positive ions left. Those positive ions are rising, whether it's rising to the ionosphere or rising other ways, the tendency is for them to rise, and they move up into the atmosphere. Okay? Go to the next one. And so they built arrays of these things and achieved 20%, 400%, 60% increases in rainfall through the utilization of these arrays in these respective countries. So we called for, in terms of a crash, immediate effort to solve the water crisis in California, but also stretching beyond, the combination of going immediately with large-scale desalination, and secondly, moving with further large-scale experimental stations utilizing atmospheric ionization techniques, with the idea of then going to large-scale projects. Each one of these projects can affect rainfall in an area of hundreds of square miles. So the impact of these is not small. Okay, so let's move on to the next that you have there on the. That's another array. We can move on from there.
Oh, another one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Which one? This one here? What?
We've lost some of the. But let's go to this top one up here.
This one here?
Yeah, somehow they've got me scrambled. Okay. Now, in terms of the galaxy right now, what do we know about the galaxy in terms of its other effects on Earth? What do we think, what do we know about the galaxy? This is a drawing of the Milky Way, our own galaxy. We've never taken a photograph of it because we've never been outside the galaxy. It's rotating. It's rotating to the left here, I don't know if we can see it here, but roughly we're in about this area. We're in the Orion arm of the spiral galaxy. Now, one of the first thing that's been found, given the new data that we have, the increasing body of data that we have on biological processes, historical biological process stretching back to the very beginning, the last 541 years, basically, that there has been biodiversity, is that the movement of our solar system through the spiral arms of our galaxy, which is about 200 billion stars. But as our tiny little solar system moves through the arms of the spiral galaxy, we have changes occurring in terms of climate, in terms of plant diversity, in terms of the emergence of new and old or new species and the extinction events of old species occurring in cycles. We go through these, in particular in terms of the spiral arms of the galaxy. As we move through the galaxy, we're moving through these arms at about every 140 years, million years. Those coincide with the ice ages. And the second item down on your chart gives you some sense of it. Because as you move in and out of these arms, you're affecting the amount of ionization. You're affecting the amount of cosmic ray flux. That is this photon delivery system. And as a result, you're getting changes of temperature, dramatic changes of temperature over long periods of times, accounting for the known ice ages, going back millions and millions and millions of years. So you can take a look at that now, and you can take a look at it later. But further, as our solar system is moving through the galaxy, we're also bobbing up and down, and that's the chart at the bottom. That is, if you look at if you take a sideways view of the galaxy, so it's like a plate. Right? In the center, there's this big globular concentration of stars, right, and the so-called black hole and all that, and the bulge. But then it spreads out, right, and so it's a plane, a disk. And as the spiral arms of this galaxy are moving, the solar system as a whole is bouncing up and down, wobbling up and down on that plane, going above the plane and below the plane of the galaxy, about 1,000 light years below and above the galaxy, roughly, in its wobble. So what does this look like? What does this look like in terms of when you compare this and you look at the data on this, and you look at when these events, how this process has occurred? How does that show up in measurements that we can make on Earth? It shows up in the fossil record. It shows up as the extinction events and the emergence of new species on a roughly 62 million year cycle. There's also a 30 million year cycle. Each going down is about 30 million, and then another 30 million going up. So the whole cycle is 62 million years. So can we have the next? Oh, or did you need to do something?
What's the next one you want?
Just the next one. Well, well, that's all right. leave the Milky Way up there, I guess, for right now.
Okay.
Okay, so what's going on? Well, we're not sure. There's a correlation. There's a correlation between this increasing activity, in terms of or lack of activity of galactic activity as it's impacting the solar system. Chain transformations of that going on. But what's the mechanism? We don't know the mechanism. You may have heard about the idea of comets hitting the Earth and there being extinction events. The equivalent of nuclear winters and this kind of thing. Some of that may be correlated with these movements, because as you're moving in and out of these arms of the spiral galaxies, you're moving out of the spiral galaxy. You're subject potentially to the nebulae that are impacting, from exploding stars, right? Collapsing stars and the exploding massive energy releases of this. We may, as the solar system, be exposed to these effects when we're outside the protection, shall we say, of the disk itself of our own galaxy. But that's very hypothetical. I mean, we haven't been around as a species through these cycles. So this is unknown, and it's something that we want to learn much more about. Now, what about geophysical activity? And we're going to come back to them in a moment. We look at comparisons of volcanic action of these large-scale basalt events on Earth. And we compare that with what's recently been found in terms of the moon, that the moon has actually been much more active and is still much warmer than we actually originally thought. We have parallels in terms of time, periods of time in which volcanic action is occurring on the Earth, simultaneous, large-scale events. I mean, these basalt events, covered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of square miles and may bury large areas, in 60 to 100 feet of lava, right? So these are large-scale events, but they occur. Is there a triggering process for these in terms of the galactic level? Just to raise that as a possibility. Then we come to the anomalies, in terms of what we know about the structure of the galaxy itself. These are questions. Now let me just stop here and maybe just throw this out, just parenthetically. Think how differently we look at the universe now than we did 40, 50 years ago, when most of us were in school. Grade school or junior high or whatever it was, we were in school. And then what we thought of as what was out there in the solar system and beyond was roughly a bunch of rocks, dead things. The universe was basically thought of as essentially dead, except for the sun and other things that are producing this energy like the sun, the stars. But otherwise, there was a lot of rocks floating around out there. And maybe some of them had gas, covered in gas or something, but they were dead. Well, now we're finding water everywhere. We have water on the comets. We have water on all these planets. We just went by Pluto. You can put up Pluto when you get around to it, but we just went by Pluto. The scientists thought they knew what Pluto was like. Well, Pluto actually turned out to be bigger than we thought it was. For one thing, first of all, that shows you how, think of the distances involved, right? We had the wrong idea of the size of Pluto. But further, it didn't look like the moon, which is what we thought it would look like. We thought that Pluto would look like the moon, and instead it was covered with ice, not necessarily water ice, but ice, whole areas that were smooth. So it was clear that some kind of activity in the geological terms that we're talking about here, in terms of, or galactic terms of hundreds of millions of years, that recently there was such activity on Pluto, and it still might be going on now, because all we were able to do as we rushed by, right, was take some snapshots. and it'll be a year before we get all those snapshots back from, transmitted. It'll take a full year to get all of them back. But nonetheless, all we had was a passing set of snapshots of Pluto. And there's all the activity going on in between. So I'm saying, if you step back and think about it, we're only beginning to discover what's going on. And what we're discovering so far is that we're dealing with something like a living process, a larger scale living process or processes, principles. All right. So, okay, just on the structure of the galaxy, of our galaxy, right? We don't know. I mean, how many billion galaxies? But just taking our own, for example, let's get another one up there.
Yeah. Okay.
If,
We had this. Oh,
Which one do you want?
okay.
Which?
is there one?
The Chandler.
It should be
PBA.
above that.
Let me pull it off. You can see it.
Well, there. Well, that's. Well, let's just jump around here a little bit. We'll just carry this thing forward. This is another galaxy in terms of anomalies. So we'll go here. This is one of our nearby neighbors. But this galaxy, this is in the X-ray portion of the spectrum. This galaxy, which you can't make out the shape of the disk here, but out of the middle here you see this plume. That plume extends out over 13,000 light years, and this is activity going on that's being generated out of a singularity in the center of that galaxy. Massive amounts of energy. We don't understand what that energy is. It's on orders of magnitude greater than the energy of the sun. Orders of magnitude. So it's one of the anomalies we've got. Go to the next one you can find.
I got this one here. You want this one? Do you have?
Well, yeah, we can use that one. We can use that one.
If you have your flash drive, maybe there's more on your flash drive that it didn't get pulled off or something.
Yeah. Let's go to that. Okay. Here's another galaxy nearby. As you can see, this is spiraling to the left as well. Some of these galaxies they're generating more energy. More energy is being generated out of this singularity, this out of the area which surrounds the black hole, the bulge. Is the name given to it, which is the highest concentration of stars in the planetary system that is given off by the entire rest of this galaxy as a whole. But I wanted to bring this up. I don't know if you're aware, I mean, scientists are struggling with this, they've known about it for decades, is that as these galaxies, all of these galaxies, as they spin, there is a flattening out of the speed at which these stars, as part of this galaxy, are rotating. In other words, out here, all of these stars out here are moving at the same speed. They stay, they're moving as if synchronized with each other, in tandem with each other, as if you had a spoke, like a spoke of a bike was moving and rotating these out. If on the basis of the inverse square law, as with our planetary system, the speeds of these outer stars should be dropping off. The way that Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and so forth, the speed of these outer planets drops off. So they're moving slower and slower and slower as you go further and further from the sun. But instead, they're moving at the same speed. The speed is higher in the center, but it drops off and then it flatlines, more or less, close to flatline. What is the cause of this? How can you account for this behavior? What is holding this in place? Well, the idea is that there must be more matter out there that we can't see. We just don't see everything that's out. If there was more matter out there, you could think of it in terms of, you know, kind of the momentum, the centrifugal force of the process could be carrying all of this along with it, right? As if embedded more or less in mud or something. You know, they're just, it's just carried along as a sheet of material. So this is what's called dark matter. It's there, or is it there? We can't see it. We haven't been able to measure it. Or are the laws of gravity different at the galactic level than they are at the stellar level, the solar system level? So this is a quandary, a paradox to be solved. We go on, see what else we got there.
That's it. There's nothing after E.
Yeah, I guess we a couple of drop valve, I guess.
Do you have your flash drive with you?
Yes, I do.
Send it over.
See if you can pop something else. Yeah. Let me stop. Any questions? Comments? So if we step back and we think about the process here from the standpoint of Earth, we're looking at kind of three levels of this all told. We're talking about solar variations, that is in the solar system itself. Actually, variations in terms of activity of the sun itself, and you see that with the fluxes of cosmic ray flux and temperature and so forth. But you saw we talked about that in the first diagram there in terms of the changes in the 11-year cycle of the sun. And then we're talking about solar variations. As you know, as you probably know, the Earth and the other planets orbiting the sun are changing all the time. The Earth wobbles on its axis. As it rotates around the sun, it's on an ellipse, and that ellipse is changing. It's not always the same. It's stretched out and it's getting more round. It's changing over time in a process. So you have these variations in the solar system, the so-called Milankovitch cycle, and so forth and so on. But even there, scientists are puzzled, because even though the tilt of the Earth towards the sun, which gives us summer, and the tilt going away from the sun gives us winter, and taking into account these other measures in terms of the Earth itself and the change in the orbits of the planets themselves, in terms of their wobble and so on, precession, don't account for the changes of temperature that we have in terms of the solar system itself, the activity of the sun itself, and its effect on the Earth. And so what they've identified is that you have a longer cycle process, a 100,000-year cycle process, beyond the 25,000-year and so forth cycles of the Milankovitch cycles. So that has to do somehow with some kind of broader harmonization that's going on among the planets and the sun, some other lawful process. So just to throw that out. And then you have the galactic level, in terms of the cosmic ray flux, the ice age process, the interaction with the spiral arms of the solar system, and so on. So you have this nesting from the actions of the sun itself and the Earth's interaction with the sun, Then you have these broader interactions in terms of the solar system itself. And then you have an even larger complex, which is the interaction with the galaxy. What encompasses all of this? What encompasses it all is the human mind. The human mind generates these higher order processes, conceptions, one after the other, which we've done up until recently. This is what is part and parcel of fundamental science. And so we're now at the level where we're beginning to explore these galactic questions. And however this works out in terms of atmospheric ionization, it's already drawn our attention to a broader frontier, which man now has to begin to master. And as he masters this, we're going to be discovering new physical principles. What is the source of the energy being generated by these active nuclei in the center of galaxies, ours and others, like the one we saw there, generating those points?
Yeah, I found one of those images.
Okay. Yeah, okay. This is from the this is as you're moving. Here's the galaxy, and this is the speed of the stars and material that we can identify rotating in the plane of this galaxy, and you can see the speed increasing and then dropping off, flatlining out. Right. So as it's going around, the speed begins to flatten out. Based on the inverse square law, this is the process that you would expect, a slowing process. But instead, you have this sustained speed level all the way out to what we can see as the edge of these galaxies. Right? That's a complete anomaly. Why? Anyway, that was one that we wanted to get to, so I'm glad we were able to put it up.
There's no.
Okay, all right. Okay. So finally, I just mentioned a couple things on the planets, because it's some of it's relevant, particularly to this issue of, think of Al Gore, right? Al Gore, it was in 2003 that he released that movie Inconvenient Truth, right? And if you may not recall, most people I'm sure don't recall, but in that movie he said that the Arctic would be completely ice-free by 2013. Okay. So now
He also said New York would be underwater by 2015.
oh, maybe it'll happen before the end of the year. 4 months left. Yeah, maybe it'll happen. Well, at the same time that Al Gore had his Inconvenient Truth, what was also being discovered on Mars was that Mars's ice cap were melting, and there's photographs of it, and you can look them up on, you can do a search and find the pictures of it, that the ice caps of Mars were melting. Well, what could be the cause of this melting process on Mars? And at the time, there was a point was drawn. Well, look, it's melting on Earth. The Arctic is melting on the Earth, and it's melting on Mars. So, big deal, right? But it did. And at the time, they did talk about the Milankovitch cycle. That the changing climate on Earth varies with the wobble of the Earth and the change in the eccentricity of the orbit and so on and so forth. So at least there's a little bit of discussion of that. But the broader question of thinking about the planetary system as a unit and thinking about it from the outside, looking at what could be the common cause of both of these behaviors, right? Was missed, at least in terms of the general public. Mars is undergoing very rapid changes right now, and we don't know why. You have now storms reaching 155 miles into the sky going on Mars, right? You have on Jupiter, there's that famous great red spot on Jupiter. It's shrinking. I mean, we've been watching Jupiter for over 150 years. This has never happened before. It's been shrinking year after year and year, and the speed of the shrinking of this storm on Jupiter is increasing. The rate of it decreased, the size of it. On Saturn, the storms, the annual storms, the year in Saturn is 27 years, but the annual storms arrived a whole season early, and they're more violent than the storms that we've seen in the past. Saturn's moon's Titan, which is an atmosphere very close to the Earth, we've just discovered that the measure of the atmosphere, the methane atmosphere, is breaking up and then reforming on an 11-year cycle, which is exactly the same cycle as the solar spot process here on Earth. So again, we're in a sense of comparative planetology, I guess you could call it. We're seeing parallel activities which raise more questions than they answer in terms of ultimate causes of what's going on, or what the mechanisms are. Even if we say, oh, it's the sun and the sunspot activity, but what's the mechanism? What's the mechanism by which the cause and effect are connected? The so-called ice giants, Neptune and Uranus. Neptune is now topping wind speeds of 560 to 1,500 miles an hour. Uranus is considered sluggish because its speeds only are about 500 miles an hour. In other words, these planets are undergoing very dramatic activity. That the dramatic activity is increasing right now. Doesn't mean it's not going to decrease at some point, but it's increasing. So we have a wealth of data coming in. We have a big picture coming in. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes. Come on in.
How you doing, Jerry?
And we have much to explore. So so here we are sitting here, stuck with the death of Cecil the Lion, and Caitlyn Jenner's sex change, and and Donald Trump. Why should we? We've got worlds to discover. We have principles to discover. There are things going on in the universe around us, bearing on our lives right now, which we have to master. And as we master them, we're going to find out a lot more. We're going to discover a lot more, and we're going to increase the powers of mankind over nature. And so this is. I hope I've at least given you some sense of it. Excuses for the kind of rough edge of the presentation here, but giving you some idea of the sweep of what we've got in front of us if we get this country up and operating again. So the drive is for Glass-Steagall to get that implemented rapidly. And the point LaRouche was making this last week in Manhattan to the Manhattan Saturday event, which are available on the website every Saturday live in the afternoon, mid-afternoon, is, if the American people want it, if the American people really want it, they'll get it done. They'll make it happen. They will move Congress. They will get Obama out of there. We will get Glass-Steagall through and implemented. Right? And likewise, in the process of doing that, we can bring together a presidential system again that operates in this country, and we can give it direction again, and we can get to the frontiers. We can go to the frontiers in the large and the small, and we can redefine our relationship with the rest of the world in the process. So let me conclude there. I open it up for questions, comments.